Hi, welcome to the training webinar. I'm Dale Franks. Today we're going to talk about building an application from scratch. For those of you on YouTube, this is now the third time I have started the webinar. For those of you who are live, I imagine you're getting really irritated at me at this point. So let us not delay anymore and go straight into the content. Anytime you're going to create a new application, every item in the application needs to go into a root folder. I've seen some various ways of organizing applications for some of your servers, and you're making your lives harder for yourself. You can organize your Process Director website however you want. We're not your supervisor. But our recommendations are based on a lot of experience with the product. And one of the things that we recommend is that every application needs to go into its own parent folder. I do this for the training webinar, you may have noticed. Here's my archive folder. It contains all of the training webinar topics that we talk about. Now, in most cases, all of my training webinar topics have their own separate application. So here's the automated check-in application, for example, that we talked about a few weeks ago. It's in its own folder. The reason that we do this, so like here's Case Manager. This is the actual application. The reason that we recommend this is that if everything is in a single parent folder, so if we look in this case, I've got a folder for my data sources, for forms, for knowledge views, for processes, and then for other resources, for example, drop-down controls or drop-down objects or other objects, business rules, perhaps, whatever it may be that I need to make this application work. In this case, I've got a couple of dashboards in here. I've got a couple of images that are in the content list so that I can use them as backgrounds on forms. I've got this little business value here. Now, for me, my organization is a little bit different because every time I create an application, there's the possibility that someone might want to have a copy of this application to install on their own server, and it needs to be able to run right out of the box. So I do some things that break some rules, but it's because I need to be able to export it onto other systems that are completely unrelated to any BP Logic systems. So for example, I have a data sources folder, which actually has an Excel spreadsheet, and it has the auto policies data source that's part of this application. Normally, you wouldn't do this. Normally, your data sources would appear in a data sources folder that is at the root of your Process Director partition. So that's where most of my data sources are, the ones that I use on a regular basis for myself. They're all here. Similarly, I've got a drop-down objects folder. So some of my standard drop-down objects, they're in the root partition in their own folder, which has square brackets in the name, turns it into a system folder. I've also got some global knowledge views here, some global business rules here, and of course my business values are all there. They're all in these root level folders. In most cases, this is how you want your system organized. You want these global objects at the root level, and you want them in their own folder. So on both this system and let's take a look at another system. So let me open up documentation, which at least when I created it was a clone of training, although they have diverged quite a bit since then. So let me log in here with LastPass, and we'll look at my content list. And this is a separate server. This is the documentation server. Let me toggle my system folders and turn them on. And so here we go. I've got my business rules. I've got my business values, my data sources. There are way fewer over here. But let's just take a look at my business values. So I've got my companies, my customer list, customers by state, get all customers and everything. Those are all at the root level on my documentation server. And I have a couple of different ones over here, but my customers by state, customer list, companies, get specified customer info, they're on both servers. Now, there's a reason for this, because when I import an application from, let's say this is my staging server, and I import it into my production server, which would be this one over here, I need to be sure that on both of these servers, in the business values folder, I have a companies and a customer list business value in both folders. And when I do the import, it's going to try to hook up my application with these global objects by looking at the business values folder at the root of the partition, and then look for the companies or customer list or get specified customer info business value. If they're in the same folder location in both servers, that's great. That's normally how you would do it. But in the application itself, obviously you have your own form, your own process timelines, perhaps your own unique knowledge views, and all of those other objects. Those all need to be stored in a single parent level folder so that all of the objects that are part of that, now in this case, there's no organization. Everything is just right here in the root folder. And that's not great, but it's not terrible, because at least everything is in this parent folder, this completed sample application folder. And so whenever I need to import this application to another server, what I actually export is the folder itself. So I just check the folder, I hit export, and it exports the entire folder with all of the objects that are contained for the application, and it exports it all at one time. When I import it, it knows all of the objects that are linked, and it will import them all at one time. I've looked at some of your installations, and you have a whole folder that has nothing but forms, and one folder that has nothing but process timelines, and then another one that has knowledge views. That is a setup that is going to make you weep as an administrator over the long term, because now when I want to import a new version of the application, I have to do a whole bunch of separate imports. I have to import my form, which will probably fail because I may have changed the process timeline. So then I have to import the process timeline, which may again fail because there's something on the form that didn't get imported because it was referencing something in the process timeline. So then I got to go back and re-import the form. I may have to do that iteratively, importing each one of those objects separately multiple times. That makes your life way more difficult than it has to be. We have a question. If I create a folder with the square brackets as part of the name, would BPL treat it as a system folder as well? Yes, it will. Anytime in fact, it will create it as a system folder in ways that you're not going to like, because we actually had someone who did this. Now, I've never actually thought about doing this myself, but we had a customer that not only had these folders here. Now, these are all at the root level of my partition. And whenever we created this system of, you know what, let's treat these folders here that are in square brackets, let's treat them like system folders. That way, we can toggle them on or off, because most of the time you don't need to look at these, right? You don't need to see your image. In fact, they just clutter up your content list. So being able to turn them off and only seeing the top level content folders where there's actual application content, that's a real convenient thing to do. So anytime you create a folder, and I phrased it that way specifically, anytime you create a folder that uses square brackets for the name, it will be treated as a system folder. Now, most of the time you think, okay, great, what could possibly go wrong with that? Well, we had a customer who was complaining that he could not see a folder in his application. That's because he went into the application and he created his parent folder, which we're going to do now. I've been talking about creating a parent folder, haven't done it yet. So let's do it. So we're just going to call this um, application because that's the most unique name I can think of at the top of my head. So, okay, now I'm in my application folder. So what the customer did is they were in their application folder. And so what they thought would be a cool idea just to say, okay, well, fine. I need to have a folder that has some business rules, right? So they created a subfolder. So we'll create a folder in here and we will call it business rules. Okay, cool. So now if I look at my application folder, it doesn't show me anything. The reason it doesn't show me anything is because I said I wanted to hide the business rules folder. So I would have to toggle this back on to actually be able to see my business rules folder. Now it does exist here. So if I manually navigate to this application folder, I can see my business rules folder and I can access it. But what I can't do when I toggle system folders off is I can't see it over here on the content list on the left-hand side because, well, you said hide system folders. Well, it's hidden and it's not going to show you. In fact, and this was the question they had. They wanted to search for it. We have folder in here, so let's search for a folder named business rules. Um, well, it doesn't exist here in training webinar. It only exists in this archive subfolder. This business rules folder has disappeared and it will not reappear until I turn on my system folders, in which case it now just magically appears under application. So this toggle system folders thing works exactly how it was designed. So keep in mind that its intent was to work solely for let me collapse everything here. Collapse all? Oh, well, I can't do that and filter it at the same time. Okay, why is everything expanded? Why isn't this collapsing the entire content list? Erg. All right, well, as you can see, this is a little irksome here on my content list. I think probably what I want to do is turn my content list off and then just refresh it. And refreshing it obviously did not work. Erg. So anyway, yes, to answer your question, you can create any folder with square brackets and it automatically becomes a system folder. And it doesn't matter where you put it in the content list, it is going to disappear if you name it with those square brackets. So you can certainly do that. You can do it anywhere. You can toggle it on and off whenever you name it with the square brackets. But I probably wouldn't name it with square brackets except at the root level, because if you toggle folders off, which I normally do, then these folders will disappear for you and that you're going to find that to be unpleasant. But I do have a business rules folder, which if I had any local business rules, quite apart from those that appear in my content list. Okay, I don't understand why the expand and collapse all isn't working. And I don't understand why it keeps expanding everything. I am getting super irked at my content list today. That's always the problem whenever I'm always running a weird version of Process Director. It's stable, but it's not doing exactly what I want it to do. So we'll turn off our system folders. But wow, that is weird. The expand and the collapse all. Oh, well, I've got filters on. Okay, there we go. It helps if you turn your filters off. So Pro tip, kids, if you have one of these checked, it's going to want to show you what you have checked, whether you expand or collapse everything or not. So, okay, it's working as designed. So I'm the idiot in this particular formulation. So, yeah, as we saw, I do have some global business rules. Now, if you have global business rules that you want to use, and as long as you have them in the same folder, both on both servers, both on your production server and your, I'm not sure what I have in this folder over here. Okay, I got nothing. So this would be a bad thing. I have something on my root folder in one server that I don't have on the other. That's going to cause me trouble. But in this formulation, it won't cause me trouble because I have these business rules, which are global business rules that I can call from any application anywhere in the system. Great. A lot of times, though, I have business rules that look at my specific form or my specific timeline to return a value. For example, if I have a customer from, the customer might be from different states. And based on the state where that customer resides, I'm going to assign things to a different technical support rep or a different sales rep, account manager, whatever it might be. I'm going to need a business rule to actually look at that customer, what they say their state is. And based on what they say their state is, I'm going to have to transfer a task assignment to someone else. So I'm going to assign a task via a business rule. That business rule is going to have to look at the form submission and figure out what state the user has selected, and based on that, make the task assignment. Okay, that's great. It's perfectly fine use of a business rule, but it's not a global business rule because it won't work for anything other than this specific application, because I'm looking at a form field on a specific form, and therefore I really can't use that business rule outside of the context of the application. So in that case, just as a matter of normal organization, I would probably want a business rules folder. I'm a little agnostic on whether the form and process timeline should go at the root of my application folder. Sometimes I do it that way. Sometimes I create a forms folder. Sometimes I create a processes folder. If I have an application that does use multiple forms and does have multiple process timelines, then I will in fact create a forms folder and a process timelines folder. And so I'll have whatever the appropriate subfolders are that I need. So normally I create a folder that I call resources, where I can just throw things in uh, that are just used in this little application, maybe images or things like that that I want to use for this application. So I'll create a resources folder. Most commonly, I think there is always a knowledge views folder, because with every application, there's generally a set of knowledge views that I would create. And so I would create that folder there. So my parent folder would have all of the application objects organized in subfolders. And then if, as in the case of our example today, I only have one form and one process timeline, I'll generally put those in the application root. And whenever I finish configuring this application and I need to export it from this system over to my production system, then everything all gets exported at once. All of the links are built into the export. I never have to worry about my export failing because I'm not exporting all of the items. The other cool thing about creating everything in a single parent folder whenever you create an application is that if I go to the properties of that folder, and then I go down to versions, I can version the entire application all at one time. Because if I version the folder, so we'll just call this V1, and this is my initial version of the app, even though I don't actually have an app or a form or a timeline. That's fine. I can create a new version, and now I have version 1, V1. I can download this version as it was saved at the time, because I've basically saved a PDZ file that contains all of this folder's application objects as is, so I can download it and import it somewhere else. If I make some changes in a new version and I've done something horrible and made a terrific mistake, I can go back and just apply this version. So I can have multiple versions here. And the nice thing about versioning at the folder level is it versions everything in the folder. And so I have my entire application. It's all versioned all at once. I can download it. I can download each version. I can import them. I can see what the differences are. Gives me a lot more flexibility. Every object in Process Director has a versions tab. So technically, I could go in and version every single object, but there's no real reason to do that. It's really a lot of extra work when all I really have to do is version the folder, and it will just version everything that is included in that folder. Although, at this particular point, the only thing that's included in this folder are a whole bunch of empty subfolders. So it's not super helpful for me now, but it will be when I have a full application. Won't it make sense for BPL to restrict using the square brackets in the folder name? So we're back to the square brackets. That's a more complex question than you would think right off the bat. Sure, we could, if we wanted, restrict the use of square brackets specifically to folders that are at the root level of the partition. We intentionally do not do it. If you want to use something as a system folder and put it anywhere in the content list, we're going to allow you to do that. Process Director is a platform, and we are very reluctant to use programming to force you to use the platform the way we think you should use it. It's your platform. You've bought it. You get to use it however you want to. Does that mean that you can use it in ways that will inconvenience you? Yeah, it does. And we're going to allow you to do that rather than enforce a bunch of rules on you that implement some method of how we think you should use a platform. We're uncomfortable doing that. You've bought a platform. You get to use the platform the way you want to use it. We give you recommendations about how we think you would like to use it and about how we think using it will make your life easier. But you know what? At the end of the day, we're going to allow you to make your life as hard as you want it to be. So we simply don't impose those kind of rules on you, and we intentionally don't impose those kind of rules on you. That's one of the reasons why we do weekly training webinars. It's one of the reasons why there are 22 different Process Director training courses right now on Reach. We're going to try to tell you how we think you would be best served by using the product. And then we're going to turn you loose on it, and you're going to be able to do whatever you want to do. And that is the key, having you do things the way you want to do them. You buy a platform specifically for that purpose. If you wanted to be told how to do things, you could just buy a consumer off-the-shelf software product that does, whatever thing that it is that you want to do, and then you can conform your processes and everything else to how that software demands that you work. We just don't place those demands on you. Another question, does versioning on the application folder also create a version for every other child object, such as supporting controls folder, resources folder? Versioning on the application folder does not create an independent version on each object, if that's what you're asking. The only object that is getting versioned is the folder. but that version contains all of the folder's contents as they existed when that version was created. So even though if I was to look at the objects itself, so all I had in here was folders, but that's fine. Let's look at the business rules folder, and let's go to its properties. There's no version for the business rules folder. Well, there is, but it's stored as part of the version on the parent folder. So if your question is, does it make an independent version of each individual object? The answer is yes and no. Yes, in the sense that in my application, when I create this version here, this version includes the folder and all of its contents in one single PDZ file that gets stored at the time. So there are versions of everything. So in that sense, yes, it does create a version. If you're talking about it in the sense of, if I go to the individual object and I look at its properties, will there be a version for that object? No, there won't be. That object's version only exists in the context of the version we created at the folder level. There are, I suppose, times whenever you might want to version individual objects. I think mostly that would apply to forms and process timelines. I think versioning subfolders is probably less useful. I think versioning knowledge views is probably less useful, but I can think of a number of good reasons why you would want to have separately versioned forms and process timelines, at least on a development server. On a production server, well, you shouldn't be doing any work on a production server, number one. So there should be no reason to create separate object versions in production. When you import the initial application, I don't know what justification there might be for doing anything other than importing the application folder and then immediately versioning it in the content list so that I have a version. And that way I just maintain a version of the entire application on production. There are very few times when on a production server, you should be going in, opening up a form or a process timeline or a business rule and modifying it on your production server. Generally, our recommended process, again, you can make life as hard for yourself as you want, but our recommendation is that if you have to change the form or the process timeline, you go to your development server, you make the changes you need to make. You export the entire application out of your development server by exporting the parent folder. Then you re-import it into your production server as is, as an entire application, and then you version it again. That's our recommendation. You shouldn't be doing any work directly on the production server, and thus there should never be a reason for you to make separate object versions of forms, process timelines, or whatever on the production server manually. That's the reason why you have a development server. The development server is where all of your work is done. The only thing that should be happening on the production server in terms of development are importing the applications. Everything else that's happening on the production server should be running valid applications that your end users are using. If you get, and by the way, I've noticed a lot of customers do this. They've decided to get into the business of just manually making changes on their production server. I can't begin to describe to you how bad an idea that is, how easy it will be for you to create a disconnect between what you have in production and what you have in development, how easy it will be to destroy your production work by re-importing from dev. It's a bad idea. So our recommendation is that you don't do anything on production in terms of development other than importing from your dev server. Like every rule, there are exceptions to that. Your global objects, like business rules, business values, custom tasks, it's best to import them from your dev server. So you create them on dev and import them into prod. But for some objects, there's an unavoidable amount of work that you're going to have to do. For example, if I import a data source from my dev server, then if it's an internal DB or internal user DB data source, who cares? But if it is some sort of OAuth data source or any other thing, when you import it, this is what you're going to see. You're going to see an empty username and password, or since this is OAuth, an empty client token, client secret and access token, because we are not going to import credentials whenever we import data sources. So for data sources specifically, you are going to need to configure them manually. Once you import them out of dev into prod, you are going to need to manually configure them. There's two reasons for this. Number one, it's not very secure to have your user credentials inside the export file, the export PDZ file, because they're just going to be ultimately, if you open up a PDZ file is a zip file. If you take a PDZ file, change the PDZ file extension to ZIP, it magically becomes a zip file. Then you can open it up as a zip file, and inside the zip file, there is an XML file. The XML file is the XML file of all of the objects that you've exported. XML is text, which means I can pop it right open in Visual Studio Code or Notepad, and all of your user credentials will be in plain text. We don't think that's a good idea, so we don't do that on imports. So that is going to require, when you import data sources, that you do open them up on your production server, and you're going to have to reconfigure the credentials in those data sources for security reasons. Not entirely for security reasons, though, also in terms of what users see. Because you might have a data source on dev that points to a bunch of dummy data. And the data that your developers, people who are working on dev, the data they access isn't real data. It's just, it looks like real data, but it's dummy data. On prod, of course, you're going to want the real data. Well, you don't want people looking at your production data on dev. And if you're making any changes to the data, and like it's external data, and you're making changes to the database by using the SQL command custom task to do inserts or updates, well, you certainly don't want that happening on your production data while people are testing in dev. So my data source in dev, let's see, do I have a, well, that's the process director database. Do I just have a SQL data source? I do. No, it's the internal user data source. That's an internal user data source. Okay, fine. I have a lot of internal user data sources. Fine. I'll try to remember not to save it. Let's just turn this into a SQL Server data source. So on a SQL Server data source, my connection string, we'll go with SQL. So my connection string, since this is a blank one, it's safe to show you. My connection string has my database name, my username, my user ID, and my password. So I don't want to pass that configuration to this external database from dev to prod. Also, this connection string on dev is going to be different than the connection string on prod because I want to look at dev data. And so that's another reason why in most cases, when you import a data source from dev to prod, you're going to need to go in and reconfigure this, because I'm now going to need to reconfigure it to look at real data rather than dummy data. And also, I don't want to inadvertently, if I were to keep this, have a production application that uses this data source that is looking at dummy data rather than production data. So easiest thing to do is just to clear these things out so that there's no data in them at all. And then you'll have to go back in and reconfigure them when you do the import. There are other global objects such as workspaces, because sometimes when you create an application, you also create a workspace for it. It is also possible that whenever you create an application, you might create metadata for that application, or a new category of metadata that you might want to apply to that and perhaps future applications as your system grows. Those are all going to have to be imported too. So those will all be imported separately from your application. Indeed, all of these global objects, such as metadata and data sources like this, or business values that go in these global folders, or business rules that go in these global folders, they'll all need to be imported before you import your application folder. So it's important to remember that there is an order of import, which I discuss in the documentation, and I don't remember exactly where it is, but I think a search for import order, in fact, I think a search for the exact term import order will return no results. I know I have it. I know I cover it in a training course. So importing, exporting content. It sounds like it might be in here. I think it's way down at the bottom of the page, and it is way down at the bottom of the page. So here it is at the bottom of this page, and let's turn off the stupid highlighting, which I should have done at first. So on the importing, exporting content topic in the implementer's reference, go to the bottom of the page, and it talks about how if you have metadata, or you've added new users or groups, or you have those global partition level content list objects, it tells you the order in which things should be imported. Basically, metadata first, then users and groups, then your global content list objects, those that go at the root level of the partition, then your application, and finally, at the very end, any workspaces that you have created. So that import order is really important. It's already complex enough without having to make it more complex by having your application objects like forms and process timelines spread across multiple folders. But that's a lot of folder talk, and we haven't actually done anything beyond that. So since it doesn't appear there are any more folder questions, let's move on. Let's talk about the objects themselves. There are really only two things that we care about in terms of best practices, and that is the form and the process timeline. Which one do you create first? Doesn't matter. Forms and process timelines often are so interrelated and have such interoperability, I can't really completely build and configure a form without having the timeline. And I can't really completely configure the timeline without having the form fully configured. So there's going to be a lot of back and forth. What I would do when I was creating my form and process timeline, the first thing I would do is create and link them right off the bat. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new form. And we'll create this form definition, and we'll call this the best practices form. And I will create it. And what it's going to want to do is throw me right into the online form designer. I don't want to be there. So I'm just going to click back on my application folder and back out of it. I've got my form, and now I'll create my process timeline. And we'll just call this best practices TL. And since my form exists, I don't really have to go anywhere. I can go into my options. And in most cases, now, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, we talked about callable subprocesses, and so that gets a little iffy on how this works and whether we're going to need to do this. But for most applications, the form is what is going to prompt the process timeline. And I need to have the form and the timeline linked. So I need to link it on both the form and the process timeline. I'm going to go ahead and do that here. And I'm going to link it here to my best practices form. Still going to have to do this. We have to create the email template. I forgot about that. Sorry, we'll make it here in a second. And we'll hit OK. We'll save that. So now my timeline is linked to my form. I need to go back into my form. And again, on the Properties tab under Options, I'm most likely going to want to set my best practices timeline as the process to start when the form is submitted. I'm also going to want to set timelines associated with form. And this is separate from automatically start this process. Automatically start this process does what it says and only what it says. When I submit the form, it will start that process. That's the only thing it does. What this association property does, this anytime you see associated with, what it says basically is we're going to use this as the default timeline for this form. So anytime, anywhere on this form that I create a condition and I want to evaluate any timeline related variable, then it's always going to use the timeline that is associated with form. Again, this is going to make your life easier whenever you are configuring the form. And if you start looking for running activity name or activity users or whatever it is that you're looking for, if you do the timeline associated with form, it will always look at this timeline and pull data from this timeline, well, actually the timeline instance of this timeline that is associated with the form instance that's running. So you do need to set both of these. Now, we mentioned the email template. We didn't create one, so we're going to go ahead and do that. So we're going to create a new email template. So once again, we're going to go to form definition. Now, at this point, before we do anything, well, I guess we need to give it a name. So we'll call it the best practices email. Best practices? No, I did it again. Practices email. And we do need to make sure that it is an email template. This is super important because what we're going to do is generate an email template from this particular form. It's going to allow us to use the form designer to set up the look and feel of our email template, but email templates are special. Email templates are, well, it's going to make an email message out of this email template. Now that's going to apply a lot of limitations to us. Email messages are always plain text messages. Now, I know when you look at your email, they don't look like plain text messages. That's because your email client, Outlook, Thunderbird, whatever, Apple Mail, has a web browser built into it. And so if it sees HTML, it will present the email to you as an HTML page. And so you can see all these exciting fonts and colors and perhaps images. Yay! But it's all just HTML. And HTML itself is just plain text. Email messages are plain text messages. So no input controls, no arrays, nothing like that. You can only have text representations in a text email, which basically means an email template is only going to work if you use plain text and system variables that obviously return plain text. That's pretty much all you can have with an email template. So it's important to have that email template selected. So I'm going to create an email template. Now on the email template itself, there are no properties that we need to configure. And once again, I'm not going to make any configuration changes to the design view of the email template itself. we'll come back and talk about that in a few minutes. I don't have any property changes to make here. And by the way, notice that because I made this an email template when I created the form, my options are super limited as to what I can do with this email template. All of those other options that you see on a normal form are missing here. So just keep that in mind. All we're going to be using this email template to do is create a plain text message. Even though it is HTML, it's still a plain text message that can be sent through an email system. So we can't have any data input controls. You can't do data entry in an email, not possible. So this is a much more limited form, but we are going to create one. And the reason that we're going to create one is that we do need to go back to our process timeline one last time, and we need to set the default email template in this timeline. So we'll set up our best practices email, and then we're just going to save this timeline and close out of it, and we'll start configuring some other things. I now have the 3 primary objects that I need for every application. I've got the form that is going to collect all of my data when I get around to configuring it. I've got my process timeline that is going to model the process that we're going to follow whenever my form is submitted. And then I have my email template, which is going to send out all of the notifications for this process. I should point out that even though we have set up a default email template in this timeline, does not necessarily mean that this is the only template that we can use. We can use as many email templates as we want. We can apply templates both at the process timeline level. And if we create an activity, we'll just create a child activity down here real quick and open up its properties. On the notifications tab of every timeline activity, I can also specify an email template for that activity. So I can have a default email template. And in most cases, that default email template will be the only template that we use. Sorry about that. I had to sneeze. As I said, in most cases, the default email template will be the only one that we use because we can configure a single email template to send different types of email messages just by throwing in some embedded section controls and ensuring that only certain sections are visible during certain activities. And that way we can send different types of messages. We can send our task assignment messages. We can send notifications to non-participants about what's happening. We can send notifications to our form submitter about whether they were approved or denied and all that. And we can generally do that on a single email template. I see a lot of times that customers will create 2, 3, 4, 5 email templates, and then they have to go in and on every single, first of all, they got to create 5 email templates, which means that on every single activity, they have to go to the notifications tab and they have to add a separate notification and change the different email template each time for each notification. That's a lot of extra work. Technically, it's unnecessary. Technically, I can get away with a single email template to do all of that. It's already 11 o'clock. Hopefully, we'll have the time to go look at the email template. We will at least look at an email template that sends multiple messages out so that we can see how that works. So for right now, let me remove this activity because we'll come back and we'll configure this process timeline in a little bit. On the form itself, there are a couple of best practices you need to keep in mind when you create the form. You need to start at the Properties tab. There's 3 very important things that you need to keep in mind on this tab. First is the instantiated form name. This is a default that we provide you, and it's the same for every single form definition that you create, because we don't know what you're doing with this form, so we don't know what to name it. So we give it a really generic name. The system variable for form definition name submitted on create date. So when I create an instance of this form, that instance name is going to be best practices form submitted on 2/6/2025. That's not super helpful. I generally want a much more specific name. For example, what kind of request is it? Who submitted the request? Is there a request number? Hint, there should be. That has some sort of unique value that I can search for. Yeah, that all needs to go into the instantiated form name. Now, we can't really do it yet because we don't have any form fields on our fields. Although here at BP Logix, there are 3 fields that I know are going to go on every form that I create. I'm going to need a submitter, I'm going to need a submission date, and I'm going to need a request number. We'll talk about the request number a little bit later. So I already know what names I'm going to be giving to those forms or those form fields: submitter, submission date, and usually I call it REQNO, REQNO, for request number. So I can't actually create an instantiated form name, even though if I was to do anything with it now, it'd come up empty. So I can just call it, well, I would just call it, I would call it REQNO. Submitter on submission date. Now I'm going to have something unique. Well, I'm going to have something unique because I'm going to generate a unique request number. We talk about this quite a lot because I do it on every single application. So I'm going to have a unique value with a unique format that's going to identify both the type of request it is, when it was submitted, or at least the year it was submitted, and what request number it was for that year. You may have other formats that you want to use, and that's fine. The important thing is it gives me a unique value, which we'll talk about in a little bit, that enables me to actually search for a specific instance in a knowledge view, for example. So it's super important. It's also good to know who submitted it and what the submission date was. It's also good to throw that into email messages as well, to let your recipient know that information, certainly if they're not a process participant. So the instantiated form name is important. The other 2 properties that are important are form fields are enabled by default. This is a way to specify how you want your form fields to work. Enabling and disabling form fields works in a hierarchy. If there is a clash between whether a control should be enabled or disabled, the clash of those enabling rules will be resolved in favor of the lowest level rule. So what we're doing is we're applying a rule here at the highest level. So it will generally be respected unless on the form itself, for a section control or even an individual control, we come up with a conflicting order. And if we do, then the section will win over the form, the control will win over the section for enabling only. Visibility works differently, but for enabling, the control at the lowest level always wins. So what I generally want to do is I want to make all of my form fields disabled by default, except when I have a new form instance. You obviously don't want to disable form fields for a new form instance. That wouldn't make much sense. That's the one time that you really do want people to edit your form fields, so you certainly don't want to disable them. So generally, we recommend that you set it to form fields are enabled only when, and then you just add a condition, and that condition should be form, new form instance. So we'll set new form instance equals yes. So in general, I only want form fields enabled when I'm in a new form instance. After that form gets submitted and it's no longer a new form instance, I no longer want my fields to be editable. as a general rule. There are probably some fields that need to be filled out by approvers here and there. That's fine. On the form itself, we'll just enable those fields whenever we need to enable them. And because that enabling rule conflicts with our form level rule, but also because it's coming from a form control, like a section or an individual control, it will always be given priority over our form level rule. So while the entire form might be disabled, I could take a single control and say, make this control enabled while we're running activity 3. And then when activity 3 starts, that control will be enabled, and it will remain enabled for as long as that condition is true. And then once we're out of activity 3, that form will go back to being, or that form control will go back to being disabled. So we generally want to set this just to prevent people from, if nothing else, inadvertently making edits to our form. Once the request is submitted, we generally want to keep things disabled so that those fields can't be edited. And if there are some fields that do need to be edited, fields that approvers need to add some information to or what have you, then we'll just enable individual sections of the form or individual controls when we need them as we move through the process. Second, entire form is read-only when. This has nothing to do with enabling or disabling the form. What it does have to do is saving any changes to the form. We don't really care what you do in the UI, but whatever it is, we're not going to save those changes. We're making the form read-only. Now, obviously, we can't do that for a new form instance. In almost every case, we can't do that whenever the form is actually working through the process. But once that process is done, we generally want to disable that form or make that form read-only so that nobody can go back in at a later date and change any of its historical data. So we are going to need to create a condition for that. And we just want to do it whenever the timeline is complete. So we'll make it read-only when timeline status is complete. So once my timeline completes, this form becomes a read-only form. Doesn't matter whether everything is enabled or disabled. We don't care. The form is read-only. Now, with these two properties, all of the form fields will both be disabled, and the form itself will be set to read-only so that you couldn't make any changes to it, even if the form fields were enabled. One of the things about disabling all of the form fields is that disabled fields always showed up as grayed out, and they generally have grayed text in a gray box. That's not great for accessibility purposes because there's not enough contrast between the gray, the slightly darker gray of the text and the slightly lighter background of the text box placeholder that appears when a control is disabled, because disabled controls are grayed out. That's why they call it grayed out. I really don't like showing those controls. However, not your supervisor, but I recommend that you click Show Disabled Fields as Text. That way, for those fields when they're disabled, you'll at least see the text for those fields in clear black and white without having that gray on gray color scheme, which would probably fail an accessibility check. Unfortunately, that graying out convention was imposed in web forms prior to people being super concerned about accessibility. So now it's one of those legacy things that we have to live with it. The way that we live with it in Process Director is to not live with it by showing disabled fields as text. That way we just don't show the grayed out control at all. We just show the text value of that control, or if it's a drop down, the display text for the control, and we just show it as plain text. And so therefore it's much more easily readable by your users. Okay, great. We've got this done. We're going to go ahead and update our form instance. Now there's a couple of things we need to keep in mind on the form itself. Obviously, we probably have a whole bunch of different, all of us probably have some, color scheme that we like our forms to be and logos that we want to see on it, all that other stuff. Sure, fine. Put all that stuff on here. I'm not super concerned about that. I'm more concerned about the technical aspects of building the form. So let's just talk about the brief number of things that we're going to need on this form. As a best practice, you should have a form title, however that gets created. You've seen my forms before. I generally have a BP Logix logo, and it's a white logo with a dark blue background, and then I have white text that is the form title. It's always good to have a form title. We'll just use the heading 1 style here, and we'll just call this form title so that I have one. And below that, I'm going to want to put at least one thing, and maybe a couple of things. I'm going to need some system variables. This is going to get a little tricky how we want to show these system variables, because we don't want to use up a whole bunch of vertical space on our form for these system variables, which are not going to show up on a new form instance. They're only going to show up whenever our process is running, but we do want them to show up. I got a couple of different options here on how I want these to work. I often put them in a hidden section control. So what I would do is I might throw in a hidden section control right here. So we'll just go with other controls, and we'll just add in we need layout. Sorry, layout controls. We need an embedded section there. And the reason I'm doing it here is I don't want to use this vertical space when the form runs. I want it all to disappear. So I'm going to throw in my section there to get rid of this extra paragraph mark, which, even though we can't see it, exists. And then I need to throw in a couple of system variables. Now, these system variables are only going to return values whenever I am actually running in a running process timeline. Outside of that context, these system variables return nothing. They're empty. So there won't be anything to see. But while we're running, there are a couple of important things that we need to see. Now, we can throw system variables on the form in a couple of different ways. And in fact, I'll show you a couple of those different ways on a different form in a second. But I need at least 2 system variables that show up to tell the user what's going on. I need to show them the running activity name, whatever it is, and I need to show them the task instructions that you as a designer are going to provide them for that activity. We'll take a look at that in a second. So I don't know why we called it this, but we called it activity running name. So I need that. And I used square brackets. I shouldn't do that. So we'll do that, activity running name, and then I'm going to need task instructions. So I don't know why I did that. Task instructions. I mean, I had already hit all caps. Well, there we go. And then I hit all caps again to turn it off because I don't know what I'm doing. Task instructions. I'm going to need that. And then in this particular case, since I've already put one embedded section control up there at the top, I am going to need to go to layout, if I can find where layout is, and throw an embedded section in on there. Generally, I don't want to show this on new form instances. This is one of the reasons why I would use it here, why I would use the embedded section control. I just want all of the vertical space that this would take up, because look what I'm doing. I'm taking up 1, 2, 3 lines. So I have 3 separate paragraph marks here. And on a new form instance, I just don't want a whole bunch of blank space at the top of my page, because on a new form instance, neither of these will return any values, but my paragraph marks still exist. So I like to use the embedded section control. And the reason is because I can go in and say, all right, fine. we'll set the display option and we'll set the field is visible. Um, Actually, there's two ways of doing this. I would probably here go field is hidden when, and I would set new form instance. Form field, form, new form instance equals yes. So that way I know it's hidden there. Actually, there's another time I might want to hide it. I might want a little more complicated condition than that. I might also want to hide it. Oops. Didn't mean to do that. I might also want to hide it whenever my timeline is complete. So we'll just go to timeline, timeline status. Actually, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do an or condition. So it needs to be, if it's a new form instance or the timeline status is complete, I want this section to be hidden. I'll have it otherwise visible. Actually, there's an even easier way of doing this. There are many ways to skin a cat in Process Director. It might be easier to say field is visible when, and we'll get rid of that. When timeline status is active and otherwise hidden. There we go. That way it won't show up on a new form instance because there's no active process timeline until you submit the form. While the timeline is running, this section will appear. And then once the timeline is complete, this section will once again disappear. So this is probably the easiest way of making this happen. So I started off with the hard way, but that's the easiest way of doing it. We're not going to get into a whole bunch of stuff about making things look pretty. So I'm not going to go in and do a whole bunch of layout stuff. That's not important. But I do need to have those three fields that I referenced whenever we were creating the instantiated form name. So I am in fact going to need my submitter, my submission date, and my request number field. So my submitter is a user picker. So we're just going to go with a user picker and we are going to name it submitter. Oops. Now, all three of these fields are going to be standard fields on my form. I don't need to have my user fill them out. I don't even want my user to fill them out. So I am going to do a couple of things for each of these forms. I'm going to give them a default value, which for my user picker control, for the submitter, is going to be form submit user. And I am going to set this field to disabled because I always want it disabled. I'm going to be filling it automatically. I'm going to do the same thing with this date time picker control or date picker control. I'm going to call it submission date. And I'm going to get rid of that space because that's going to cause problems. And once again, we're going to go to its field properties, set its default value to form submit date. And once again, we are going to disable that field. And then finally, I'm going to have my request number field. This is going to get a little more complex. I'm going to need to set this request number, but I don't want to set it on the form because in my particular case, I'm going to set it via a sequence number system variable. So I'm going to have to configure that. And I want to configure that in the timeline. I'm going to configure it in the timeline because I don't want to generate a sequence number until I actually have a running timeline. So this field is still going to be set with a default value, but in this case, I am just going to set it as a string and I'm just going to give it the value generated when submitted. That'll be my default value. And once again, I'll set this field to be disabled. We'll have to address that in our process timeline whenever we set that up. But at this point, I'm happy. I've got a form that has all of the basic things I need to make it work. And this is the stuff I need to do for every form that I create my inside my installation. Obviously, I'm going to throw a whole bunch of other form controls on this form. You should probably use sections to split your form up. So these three controls technically should be in sections. I should have some sort of section here in the middle of the form that has, my form controls for submission. I might have another section for uh, the the approval section that might have its own form controls, whatever. Right now, we're just going to have this as a placeholder for what the actual content of the form is going to be. Then I need to put two more controls on the form. I need to go into actions and I need to throw in a button area control. That's where my OK button and submit button and all the other buttons are going to appear. And I'm going to put it right here because below it, I'm going to put my final control on this form, which is going to be my routing slip control, which shows the process that this form is taking through the process. Now, I put them on in this order because if I don't put a button area control here, then Process Director, when the form runs, is going to throw one on at the very, very bottom of the form by default. So technically, I don't need to put a button area control on the form because if there's not one, Process Director will put one on, but it will put it on the very bottom of the form, which means I'm going to have to scroll down through this routing slip if I don't set it above the routing slip. And if you have a long process with like 30 or 40 different activities, then scrolling through this routing slip just to click OK is going to be super tedious. So we throw in a button area control and we'll stick it above the routing slip so that, yes, I do have to look through the form content itself. But once I get to the bottom of the form content, there are my buttons. I don't really have to look at the routing slip unless I want to. You can also have multiple button area controls on a form. But for best practices, this is pretty much how your form needs to be configured. You need to have a title. You need to have, actually, you don't even need a title. I mean, you could literally just start it with the system variables, but you do need the system variables. When this form is running, you need to know whenever the form opens up, especially the person who is assigned a task, they are going to need to know, A, what task is it that I've been assigned? Nice to have that at the top of the form. And B, what is it that I'm supposed to do? Nice to have that at the top of the form too. That's why we have both of these system variables thrown in at the top of the form. With this, we're kind of happy. I think we can save and close our form design because now we have a form that at least encapsulates all of our best practices. Now, one quick thing about these two system variables. I put them here on the form in plain text. That's fine. You can do that with system variables. When Process Director sees the squiggly brackets, it will know that it's a system variable and it will try to convert it to a system variable. So if you just throw it down there in text, that's fine. Now, I have a couple of different practices that I like to use rather than just putting system variables in plain text on the form. I generally don't think that's a great idea, so I would recommend against it. But let's go look in the archive and let's look at this form here that I do in Advanced Design Concepts. Let's open up this form. Let's take a look at the top of it so that we can see what I've done here. So in this particular case, what I'm using are system variable controls. So I insert system variable controls and I can throw in my system variable. Now, notice on the activity running name, I've done something a little bit different, and it would probably be best if we pop open Visual Studio Code so that we can actually take a look at this in a size that is more legible for you. Let's close that. And let's go ahead and just create a new text file. And let me just paste that there and we can +++ So this is the system variable that I've thrown into that system variable control. Again, it's activity running name, but what I've done is I've used the pre um, uh, variable, what is it? That would be a modifier, not a formatter. So that is the pre modifier. And I want to have it throw out some text in front of that, which basically will be boldface text that says running task colon space. So if my activity was activity one, and I can't boldface here, so we won't actually be able to see the boldface in Visual Studio Code, but what the end user should see is at the top of the form, running task activity one. And of course, this will be boldface. So what the pre-modifier does is it allows you to specify some text that you want to appear prior to the value that gets returned by the system variable. In this case, the running activity name is activity one. So this is what my system variable returns. And this is the text that is in the pre-formatter. So you can actually use that those system variables to change up, or those modifiers to change up how that system variable displays on the form. And I've done the same thing for task instructions. So I've also colored them red. And so basically, I'm going to see red text at the top with both running task and the word instructions. Both of them are going to be bold-faced, red at the top of the form. So it will presumably gain my users' attention whenever they first open the form and they see all of that red text at the top of the form that tells them what it is they're supposed to do and what activity in which they are running. So now that I have my form set up the way that I want it set up, I have to go in and set up my process timeline. We've set up our form, we've set up our email, so those as best practices are done. Now, I do have a request number, so the very first thing I need to do is get that request number set up. I have two options for this. Technically, if I create an activity, I have let's say I wanted to create a user activity like activity one. Technically, before activity one starts, on task start, I could set the value of my, I didn't change the name. I called it input 5. Well, it's always good to know whenever you've made a mistake. And now I know I've made a mistake. So let's go back to my best practices form. And we'll have to go back into the design view of the form, and we'll have to click on that right there. And I did not rename it from input 5. And I called it REQNO on my main form. So I need to name it that here. So we have RECNO. So now I have the proper field names. I'm going to have to resave my form. Now I've made a little mistake in the configuration. It is not a mistake that is irretrievable, but I am going to need to go back in and make some change on the form controls tab of the form definition whenever this thing saves. Okay, and now it has saved, but it did not close. So hopefully the save worked well enough so that if I go to form controls, my input 5 control, I want to get rid of this. I replaced it with the RECNO name. Process Director just created a new control or a new field called RECNO and marked this field input 5 for deletion. Great. Let's just go ahead and delete it. We don't have any form instances or anything like that. So we can just go ahead and delete that. So now I've got my RECNO field. It did transfer over the friendly name. So we'll need to change that. I might as well just call it request number, change that friendly field name. And I should be able to update at this point. And there we go. There's my request number field. That's set up properly. So now let's go back to my best practices timeline, and excuse me for a moment. Okay, so let's go back into my best practices timeline. Let's create an activity. And as I said, once I create an activity, I have a set form data for that activity, right? So I can go to the set form data tab and I can say, when this task starts, I want you to do a set form data action and I want you to run it on my request number field. This will work fine. I don't like using it much because I don't like hiding set form datas. I mean, sometimes I'll do it, but this is a set form data for the request number itself. And I don't like hiding it away in the set form data tab. I'd kind of like for it to be more visible than that. So I don't think I would do it that way. I don't think I would create a set form data for that. I think what I would do is what I always do is I would create this first activity. I would call it set request number. And I would change the activity type to a custom task. And for this activity, I would use the set form data custom task. So we'd go to form data mapping, set form data, and we would add that custom task. And I'll set my container form as the best practices form. Question, does it matter if the input 5 field is deleted versus remapped? In my case, it didn't matter because I didn't have any data. So I can safely delete that field because I didn't have any data. Let me save my form or my process timeline. Let's go back to the form. So when I had that input 5, well, let's do a section 6 here, right? Let's just rename that section so that we can, now this is the section control. Section controls don't have values. So don't at me, bro, but we'll just call this section submission. And we'll just say this is the submission fields. Okay, fine. So we've made a change. We've called it section submission. Now we're going to save, and it's going to take a couple of seconds to resave. And what's going to happen as part of the save process is it's going to mark section 6 for deletion for us. And again, it's a section control. Section controls technically don't have values, so we're not going to worry about the values, but we're going to pretend that it's a data control that actually does have values for the purposes of this example. Actually, section controls do have values. It's 1 or 0 based on whether it is expanded or not. So on our control here, where we get whether we want to delete or remap, if I have existing form instances, so I've had 10 people who have submitted a form and they filled out this field, I don't want to delete it because if I delete it, it's gone forever. So right now I'm in a situation where I have 2 separate controls. I have section submission, and that will now be the control for today and all future forms. All past forms had a section 6. There's data in section 6, and I don't want to lose that data. If I delete it, I am going to lose that data. So what I want to do is move that data, because I do want to delete section 6 because that control is no longer valid. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say, okay, well, fine. We'll just go to section submission and we'll remap all of the values. It'll say, are you sure you want to remap this? Yeah, I do. So I'm going to remap all of these values. And now it's remapped. Section 6 is gone. And section submission now contains all of the values that were in the old section 6 control. and they're now part of the section submission control. And so now it's all concatenated into a single field. So I can go back, look at my historical data, and all of the data will be in this field. If I don't do that, then I'm never going to see that old data. That old data is only going to display in a section 6 field, which no longer exists. So that remapping unifies the data, lets process director know, oh, we're moving everything over to this new field, even though it's only new because I renamed it. And now we can move all that data over, and that is now our primary field. So that's the difference between deleting and remapping. If you delete, it's going to delete. It's going to get rid of all of that data. Okay, so I have got this set request number, which is where we were just a few minutes ago. I hadn't configured it yet. I'm not going to make a lot of configuration changes. I'm just going to use a sequence number. Now, the sequence number is a complex custom variable. If you give it a category using this syntax, where a category could be anything that you want, you know, HR, vacation, whatever, you can set a sequence number, and we'll just set it like this. And giving it a category starts it from scratch. I have examples in the documentation and examples in many other webinars of setting various types of sequence numbers. So the purpose of this particular webinar is not to set sequence numbers and to get into detail about that, especially since we only have 25 minutes left and I got to wrap this thing up at some point within that 25 minutes. So suffice it to say, I can create sequence numbers with a lot of different variation in terms of the format. Obviously, I would add to the sequence number. There's examples in the documentation on the sequence number variable about how you can set up custom sequence numbers with weird formats and stuff like that. Please look at that documentation. The important thing for us is that I have a sequence number and that the sequence number doesn't get generated. I got to pick my form. Training webinar application best practices form. Thank you. Oh, actually, that's not what I need. I actually need the form control that I'm going to set, which is my request number. That's the one that's super important. So I'm going to have this section number category, and it's going to set the value of request number to that sequence number, however I define that sequence number. And I'm doing it inside the process timeline because I want to have a running process timeline instance before I burn a sequence number. There's no real way that I can use a sequence number and set it anywhere in the form's lifecycle that will not burn a sequence number prior to the process being started. So if the user submits the form, then great, that sequence number is fine, and I can use it as the request number for that particular instance going forward. The thing is, if the user does not submit the form, they close the form or what have you, there's no hook in the system's life cycle that I can use to say, okay, well, set the request number because I know that this form event is only going to fire when the form is actually submitted. That just doesn't exist. Like form close, the form is going to close when you close the form, whether you close the form by clicking the submit button or whether you close the form by clicking the X icon in the upper right-hand corner of your Windows screen. That form is going to close. And that event is going to fire when the form closes, and it's going to generate a sequence number. And once a sequence number is generated, it can't be reused. I can't go back. That's what I am talking about when I say we're burning a sequence number. I want all of my sequence numbers to go in nice logical order without skipping any numbers from 1 to 9,999. And so the only way to make that happen is to generate that sequence number in the process itself. So the very first thing that happens in my processes is the set request number. Again, I don't have to do it this way. I could, for my very first activity, just use set form data. I don't because A, it's easy to skip that. And B, once you have it set, it is not immediately obvious when you open the process timeline that a request number is being set via a set form data at the very first activity in the process timeline. It's best to just make it explicit. So if I get hit by a bus and somebody else has to take over this application, when they open up this process timeline, the first activity they're going to see is set request number. It's a custom task. It does a set form data. It's going to be immediately obvious what it is that I'm doing. Now I can start setting up my regular old user activities and other activities that will be part of my process. So I'm going to create activity number 2. Obviously, I need to ensure that this object happens, this activity occurs after the set request number is complete. So I'm just going to do a drag and drop to ensure that this activity is dependent on the set request number. I don't want them to run in parallel because the activity 2 will start and display a form prior to the request number being set. Don't want that to happen. Want the request number to be set. Once that request number is safely set and I have a valid request number for that form instance, then I can start my user activities. So in this case, I have activity 2. We're not going to get too deep into activities. Obviously, it should have, activities should always have a name that means something that is logical. So supervisor approval, because remember, we need to display this name using the running activity name system variable on the form itself. So if you have some weird naming conventions for timeline activities, you're going to really confuse your users when they see the timeline activity name pop up there and it's got some weird naming convention. For all of your objects, just use normal logical names for the objects. Names that make sense. You don't need to use any sort of special weird programming convention or anything like that. If the field is called, if you're trying to store the first name, call the field first name. That's the easiest way to go about naming stuff. Now, for timeline activities, we don't have to worry about spaces or anything like that. We can call them whatever we want. So we'll just call this supervisor approval in plain English. And the second thing we need to do for every activity is we need to ensure that we have instructions in that activity. So whatever that instruction is, please review and approve or deny this request. Now, I've said approve or deny. That implies that I have an option for my approval. So I need to ensure that I have results. Now, if you do not configure a result for a user activity, you always should, but if you don't, a default result, complete, will appear. That's not great, but at least it'll work. If you're in an approval loop or some sort of iterating loop like that, then it's very important that you have a result, that you have a couple of results. In fact, I probably shouldn't even be doing this activity here. In fact, what I should be doing is creating a parent activity. I've gotten so far down into the weeds, I've kind of lost sight of what I should be doing. So let's, well, I've already messed it up. So I closed it. So or did I? No, I messed it up. I closed it. So let's do something different here. We're going to set this to a parent activity, and we're going to call this approval process. And we're going to create an approval loop. And we should always have an approval loop for any sort of multi-level approval, because somebody might disapprove and I got to be able to handle that disapproval. Somebody might want some more information, so I need to return it to the initial person who submitted the activity or submitted the form. And so they're going to need to make some changes and resubmit it. So I got to restart my approval process. The best way of doing that is inside a loop. And in the loop, I can define when I want to jump back to the top of the loop and when I want to cancel the remainder of the loop. So and I can do this really easily, I can add a condition and I can say, for my timeline activity, if any child activity results, so all of my approval activities will go under this parent. They'll be part of this loop. And so then I can say, all right, well, if I have all these activities inside the loop, then if any child activity result contains resubmit, then I want to jump back to the top of the loop and give the person who submitted the form a chance to change the information for the request so that I can understand what it is I'm approving better, or I can have them give me some missing information or whatever. And also, what if I don't want to allow this request to continue? What if I want to deny the request? I don't want to have it go through the remainder of the loop. I just want to get out of the approvals completely. So I can also check for any child activity result. So under timeline activity, any child activity result. And we'll use contains here rather than equals because I like the little looser syntax, but we'll look for deny. So anytime we're going to deny, I just want to skip the loop completely. Now, the cool thing about this is that now inside this approval, I can actually create all of my child activities, and I can have them run however it is that I need them to run with whatever dependencies that those activities need. And I have done the wrong thing here, so you're going to have to forgive me. Let me remove those activities. I needed to create child activities. I got a little too eager with the clicker there. So there we go. Now I've got my child activities. So I might have manager approval, supervisor approval, whatever, for any of these child activities. In fact, let's take a look at a timeline where I've already implemented all of these, and we already looked at it previously. Well, we looked at the form previously. Let's look at what a finished version of such a timeline looks like, so we can kind of see how it's configured. So if we open up this timeline, I've got my approval section, which is a loop. And in this case, I'm not jumping back to the top of the loop. In this case, all I'm doing is I'm deciding whether I'm going to approve or deny this request. So I only have the cancel the remainder of the loop when the condition is met if any child activity result equals deny. Now, I do actually have another example of this too that's very similar. So, oh, unfortunately, that is a zip file. It is not fully imported, so I can't show you that there. So let me go over here, see a different example where I do actually loop back to the top of the loop. So let me go to my documentation server. And I think I have a 2020 training project here. I do. And we'll take a look at our change of student major process. Well, are you gonna open for me or not? Okay, not sure why this is taking so long. Ah, finally, there we go. Well, this one doesn't have that either. It doesn't have but I mean, it's the same kind of thing. It has the same approval loop, but it doesn't have the example that I was looking for. And I'm not entirely sure where it might be. And I wanted to show you an example of it, but we're running out of time. It's already 11:49, and we haven't looked at the email template. In any event, if I hit deny for supervisor approval or manager approval, it just automatically takes me out of the approval loop entirely. And so your approvals should be inside an approval loop simply because it makes your life a little easier. If I do need to jump back to the top of the loop, uh, we can do like I just showed you a minute ago where I have that resubmit result. Obviously, that implies if we're going to set it up like that, that on my activities themselves, I am going to need approve, resubmit, and deny. Uh, that's where I want to be, right there. Well, now I've gotten rid of my activities. Okay, fine. We'll go back over here. Obviously, for every activity that I have inside my approval loop, when I look at the results, I'm going to need a deny result to make it restart. I used resubmit a few minutes ago, so I would need a resubmit result to restart the loop. All of these other activities or all of these other results are basically different results that I would pick at when I'm going through different types of processes. This particular one happens to be a multi-process result there, or it's actually a multi type request. So it makes different types of requests so each types of request have their own results. It's part of the Advanced Design Concepts webinar. Most of you have been there, most of you have seen it, so you know what I'm talking about. But if we're going to have that, we're going to have that loop, which we should, and we should have the configuration to at least cancel the remainder of the loop when the condition is met. Whatever child activity results that you pick on these loops, just remember your activities are going to have, or on these loop conditions, your child activities are going to have as accessible results in the activities themselves. Let's talk about the email notification. We created a single email notification. We made it the default email for our process timeline. How does this work? Well, as I said, with an email template, you can have the same email template send multiple email messages. I really only need two pieces to make this work. Well, actually, I really only need one piece to make this work. I need to use the embedded section control. So if we look at this email template, I have three different embedded sections. So I've got this very first section up here at the top, section task. That's where my task notifications go. And then I've got a second one here called disposition HR. So this is the notification to HR that or this is notification to the user that HR has taken a look at my request. They've completed it and they've sent it back to me. And then finally, at the very bottom, I have this one here. This is my manager's disposition, and it sends the submitter a email notification that the manager has finished, and this is what the manager said that they would do. Now, there is a little mistake here. I apparently have thrown in an extra line break, which I do not want. And for some reason, it's not allowing me to delete that line break. There we go. That's how I want it to look. I'm putting these sections back to back intentionally because I'm concerned about the vertical space of having extra paragraph marks here. So I just don't want there to be any extra vertical space, because if I have vertical spaces between the end of one embedded section and the start of another, then it's going to throw an extra paragraph mark. So what I'm going to end up with, if I don't do it this way, what I'm going to end up with is an empty paragraph above this notification. I'm sorry, an empty paragraph above that notification and two empty paragraphs above that notification. So my email is going to look weird. So I'm doing that for formatting purposes. The important thing about each of these embedded sections is that they have visibility conditions on them that are mutually exclusive. And we'll take a look at that in a sec. And each of them has their own email data control. Now, I don't necessarily have to have three separate email data controls. The reason that I do is because I want to customize what my subject is for the email that gets created. And to customize the subject for each email, I need to have separate email data control. So obviously the amount of data that I'm putting here for my task notifications is far different than the data that I am putting here for that notification. In any event, I can only have one email data control visible at any given time. So because I'm using multiple email data controls, and again, wouldn't have to do that if I just had a standard subject, request number, whatever, submitted on whenever. If I just wanted that to be my standard email or my standard email subject, and I wanted to make that for all of them, well, I could get rid of two of these email data controls, and I would just stick my email data control on the bottom outside of any of the embedded section controls. Or technically, I guess I could put it at the very top as long as it's not one of the embedded section controls. But with this particular email template, I basically have three embedded sections, each of which has a different message or message type and sends something different to the end user. And the only thing I have to ensure, especially because I only want one of these messages, including its email data control, to appear at any given time, is on the Form Controls tab, which will be the easiest way for us to see this. If we look at the Form Controls tab, I've got three different conditions, and I guess you can't see it, but basically all of the conditions are complex enough so that they are mutually exclusive. So at any given time, no matter where I am in the process, no matter what's going on, I need to be able to create conditions that are specific enough so that one and only one of those embedded sections can show up on any given email message that is being sent out by the system. As long as I have it set up that way, and some of these are relatively complex conditions, some of the conditions are a little bit simpler. I mean, the reason that this is so complex is because, unfortunately, it is a it's a multi-type request. So it can be an HR request, it can be a complaint, it can be a leave request. It does a whole bunch of different things, which means that it makes creating these conditions a little bit more complex. I believe if we go back over here, on the other hand, and we take a look at this email template, email templates right there, and we take a look at our notifications. On this email template, I believe I have multiple notifications. It's taking forever to open up, and we are rapidly running out of time here. So I don't know why this particular server is taking such a long time to respond. But we're pretty much out of time. So I guess we're not going to be able to look at it. Nope, it's not going to load up. So, these conditions could be as simple as if running activity name is supervisor approval. And then I want to send this message if running activity name is supervisor approval. And if any other activity is running, it won't be shown. And obviously, if the other activity is, or the other notification is, field is visible when manager approval is the running activity, then it'll only show up during that activity. So it's not as difficult to make these conditions as it seems. This just happens to be a rather more difficult implementation of that. But that allows me to have my single email notification, which sends multiple notification messages based on where I am in the process. And so I really only need these three objects: the form, the process timeline, and my single email notification to actually it should be here. So I only need these three objects to actually make my application work. There are other best practices, but what there isn't is time. So with the expiration of our time, I have to say goodbye. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next week. So long.